Good morning, everyone. It is Friday of Art and Code Homemade. My name is Golan Levin. I'm professor of art at Carnegie Mellon University and director of the Art and Code Festival. And it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the Friday morning session of Art and Code. We're going to have three presenters this morning at 10 a.m., 10:30, and 11 a.m. They are Max Bitker, Lajane McMillian, and Hannah Perner-Wilson. First up is Max Bitker, who is a teacher, artist, and software developer interested in tool sharing as a creative practice. His practice combines an appreciation for the limitations of digital materials with patience and care for human needs. Max Bitker.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be, at the Art and Code Festival. My name's Max. Thank you for the introduction. I guess that I wanted to preface my talk a little bit with the place that I'm coming from, which is I think that I'm somebody who has been making simulations and games for a long time, and that's been a way that I've tried to understand the world, and it's been something that I've gotten a lot of joy from. But I've always had a little bit of a monkey's paw thing happen when it's hard for me to share that joy with other people because on one hand, computers in the first place just are so frustrating of trying to create art with them and express yourself. You all can imagine the things that go wrong, but also I think that naturally when you try to express an idea with a computer, it comes across as maybe opaque or doesn't necessarily invite someone inside. And so the ways that in my practice I've tried to deal with that have been to make not just simulations or games, but also to make tools that really put the creative power and the expressive power in the hand of the person who's playing with them. And additionally, I think that I've tried to make things that expose the internals of the way that they work. And so computers are by default kind of opaque. And I think that anytime a system can put a glass lid on what's happening inside or make it audible in some way, it is one step that you can take to share and make that less less of a single person experience. So I was teaching this fall a class about designing tools, and I think that my favorite resource that I've drawn from my own practice is that there's this zine by Kate Compton called Casual Creators, Designing Tools for Casual Creativity. And this is a very wonderful and short PDF that you should totally download and read. But the premise is kind of that humans do so much creativity for the sake of its own joy and for the sake of communication that can be so fun and effortless. But oftentimes creation processes on computers are don't capture that same thing, even if they're still very powerful and expressive. And so the zine itself kind of draws some connections between what it thinks that oftentimes things like crafting supplies provide to somebody that Photoshop does not. And I guess that when I was thinking about this festival and about the concept of craft and being homemade, I was thinking about this zine, and I was thinking about designing creative environments or creative materials and tools for people, and reflecting on what craft is to me. And I think that I see craft as one thing that I love about it is how closely it is connected to its materials. And so when I think about a crafted object, oftentimes that's something where the materials that went into it are very exposed and visible proudly. And because you can see the grain of the wood or the stitches in the material, you it's also visible to you the act of the process of the creation is very visible in the final result. And so and not only does that connect you to the process of creation, but it also connects you to the person who created it, because their fingerprints are kind of left exposed. And so to me, that's one thing about like crafted objects that draws my attention to like their relationship with materials. And I guess that when I say material, just for like syntax disclaimer for the rest of this talk, like I'm talking about matter from which, or a thing that another thing can or is made. This is a house made of wood. And like a thing about materials is that they themselves are oftentimes made of other materials. So like it gets a little bit confusing. And when I say materiality, I guess that I mean the influence on a thing of the materials that compose it. And so this is a skeleton that is composed of pasta and glue. And it's not just a coincidence, like it matters the fact that it's made of pasta and it affected the experience of the person who made it. It affected the shape and the way that it looks and the way it fits together and the decisions they made. It also affects our experience perceiving the pasta skeleton and what we think about it. And so like that's its materiality to me. And like similarly, I think that in the world of like digital art, digital things are made of digital materials, and they have a digital materiality. And so this is a painting that is made inside of Microsoft Excel, actually using like the line tools, and it has properties that are connected to the fact that it's made in Microsoft Excel. It's not just an implementation detail. So quickly, I wanted to go through like 5 ways. This was just like my attempt to maybe like list out different ways that like a material supports a creative process. And so like starting off with maybe the obvious is that like a material gives you your properties that you exist in the world with. And so if you want to like make something that has mass or volume or tensile strength or a color, the way like there's no way to do that besides through adopting those properties from a material and combining them in a different way. And so I guess that like I didn't want to leave this one out because it's basically like materials let you make anything at all, but I also don't exactly know what to say about it. And I guess that like to move on like to this one, which is maybe the corollary, is that not only do they provide like physical properties, but materials also impose their own limits and constraints. And so this can be a frustrating thing, obviously, but it also, I guess, like is part of the process of mastering a material, or learning to work with it is learning to appreciate its constraints and its limits. But if I'm learning anything from that zine that I mentioned and Kate Compton's work, it's that like, and also this is just I think a well-known thing in like the creative world, is that nothing can help you feel creative like a constraint and a limitation. And so if you ask someone to make an artwork about anything, they won't know where to start. But if the more constraints and boxes and limitations you put them in, it's like exerting pressure on one part of your brain and an idea pops out somewhere else. And so physical materials have tons of constraints, and that makes them pleasurable and easy to be creative with. And it's not just about, I think, knowing when to like where to start an idea, but I think that the constraints and limitations of a physical material, like for instance, like these are perler beads. They're like these little plastic beads that you can melt together to make little 2D artworks and stick them to windows. And they have like a minimum resolution of like how big a single bead is. And once you've assembled them together, you can't make anything more detailed and you're done. Like it's a stopping point. And so I think that materials limitations give you like both creativity to start ideas and knowing it kind of tells you when to stop because they have a maximum resolution or capacity to be worked with. And so like, for instance, this is a pottery wheel, and clay, when it's been manipulated for a long time, it starts to lose its strength and get floppy and fall apart. And so it means that if you are like throwing pottery, you have to stop at a certain point, and that makes the creative process much more pleasurable because otherwise it's a hard part of making artwork. So I talked about like the constraints, limitations. I think that maybe like a little bit more esoterically, I think the materials hold their own knowledge and their own ideas. So like especially it's really evident, I think, if you look at natural materials. And so if you look at wood or you look at wool, these exist as part of a living being, and they fulfill a need for that being, keeping the sheep warm, keeping the sheep dry, and as well as many other needs. And when you appropriate them into, you know, like a piece of artwork or something, you're taking on all those ideas and knowledge, and they benefit you, or they can work against you as well. But like the sheep is the sheep, like the wool holds information, I think. And it's not, and I would say this even applies not only to like natural materials, but like materials created by their people or materials created by the natural world. They all kind of hold ideas. And those ideas influence, like they don't just influence, I think, the thing that you make with them. I think that the ideas also end up in your own head and they teach you. If you look at the world of like Montessori learning, or just like the way that children naturally learn about the world, and my personal favorite way to learn, it has to do with like manipulating materials and using your own senses and your own, like making theories about them, and you can learn so much about the world in this way. So like, I think that the ideas that can be expressed here are not just about like, oh yeah, like color and shape and understanding how to use your hands, but more complex conceptual things. Like a material can teach you about angles and repetition and tiling. And it's not the same as reading a book where information is being kind of like given to you in a rote way, but you're creating the information on your own with the aid of the materials that are given to you. And so someone did provide you with materials that they thought would be helpful to you. And that's, I think, like, you know, the best thing that a learning environment can do, but you're doing the teaching yourself with the material and the learning. So, and it's not just for kids. Okay, so like moving on, I think that another thing materials accomplish is that they're this common language. So the same way that I can have kind of like a conversation with the world through a material, then this material is shared with someone else. They're working with the same material, they have their own relationship. And now we kind of have like a proxy relationship with each other because we both have a relationship with weaving or something, or with fiber or with Lego. And so this isn't just like a social amazing thing that happens, but I think it's also very pragmatic and practical, where if there's a common material that has known ways that it behaves and compatibilities, like let's say like plumbing fittings, I could repair plumbing with different pieces from somebody that was installed by somebody who I never met 30 years ago, because they fit together in a certain way. Like it's a physical language. And I think that particularly when it comes to these like familiar everyday materials that people have relationships with, they take on this like interactivity and this like amazing, I don't know, like mental reactivity. And so like, for instance, this is just a image of an Acropolis made of Lego, but if you have a relationship with Lego and you've used them and touched them and you have experience in your mind, this image kind of becomes reactive, where you can imagine what it would be like to touch it and rearrange it, and maybe what it would feel like to like put it in your mouth, like, or how it would break, or what else you could make with these pieces. And this is like, I think something like the effect can be really strong. I think that it's best with these common everyday materials. Like this is a house made of matchsticks, and if you have a relationship with matchsticks and you've touched them before, you can kind of like imagine what it would feel like to touch this house. And then also when you see something like this, you can see in your mind's eye what would happen. And so like, because this material, this house is made of a material you have a relationship with, you have this extra depth of interactivity. And I call it like interactivity with the artwork. So that was a lot about physical materials. And I think that like, I kind of mentioned a little bit about digital materials and the idea of something being made of another digital object. And I think that this is again, this Japanese Excel artist, Tetsuo. And he actually was like a retiree who wanted to start painting and thought that like, I don't know, in an interview I watched, he said that he thought that like brushes and and paints are too messy, and he already had a computer, and he said he was very stingy and didn't want to pay for any other software, which I like that story. He's like, I already have Excel, it's good enough. And the material of Excel really affects not just like, you can see visually there's certain motifs and textures and shapes that show up because it's influenced by the way that the drawing tools work in like the Microsoft tool. But then also I think that, yeah, it affects the way that we perceive this artwork as well. Especially, and also I think like you can imagine just looking at this image, the chaos of all these little boxes all over the screen selected, and what would happen if you were to drag them or drag one of the little green buttons. So I think that another important property of digital materials beyond some of the other properties we talked about before is that digital materials are very much constructed. And so, yes, like physical materials can be constructed by humans. Like obviously Lego does not occur in the natural world, but in the digital world, like everything is constructed by people and in a relatively like short amount of time. And it's constructed also by companies. And so like, it's a much more constructed landscape. And it means that when you're working with digital materials, the intentions of a human like are very close, even if they're hidden, like they're lurking, and they're strong. And so I think that this can be a really beautiful thing. Like some digital materials are really designed with somebody was trying their best to help you create things or to help themselves create things, and then they shared it with everyone else. And maybe they have like intentional constraints built in and intentional properties to help you accomplish something. But because they're constructed like, you know, by companies, and like I think something, I consider Instagram to be like a digital material, the way that it has little pieces you can assemble in different ways to produce different things of posts and stories and messages and notifications. Like all those things can tell many different stories, and it is expressive, but it also has an agenda. And so I think that in the world of digital materials, you are like swallowing more of the environment around you, and it's worth being conscious of it, because like I think that computer materials themselves have a tendency to present as neutral and to obscure that relationship of that someone designed them with intentions besides your own. And so like, I think that one of the ways that computer materials do obscure that relationship and that intention is the way that they're so deeply layered. And that's like the second property of digital materials that I think is worth adding on to the other things I mentioned before. And so when I say layered, I mean that all materials are kind of made of other materials. Like I said, wood is made of cellulose, is made of carbon, is made of atoms. Like, you know, the physical world has this hierarchy of materials being composed of other materials, but in the digital world, those layers like are there's a lot of them, and they are very like opaque. And so anything you make on a computer is going through many layers of like, even just like the programming language, and then like, you know, the machine code or the operating system, and then the hardware. But in reality, like it can be a lot, you know, there's many layers, and it's kind of, and they're kind of like history or sediment. And it's all very opaque to actually understand, like, where did this assumption or where did this idea come from? If I have a problem with the way computers work, was that idea encoded way down here, like in the 70s? And can I change it still? Like, can I swap this out? It's hard. And so it's not it is, there are many layers and it is kind of opaque, but it's not like infinitely layered. Like it does bottom out somewhere and it can be understood. And so it's like, I think that maybe computers kind of sometimes don't want you to ask these questions or don't want you to look down here, but it's just because it's opaque doesn't mean it's not knowable. And so I think that like I kind of mentioned, like, oh yeah, so like maybe you're making something in the material of a game engine, and that game engine is assembled out of files, and maybe those files are just like an image file, and so the pieces of the image file are little pixels, and the pixels are made of bits, and then the bits are then themselves made of like registers and different hardware, and that hardware is made of transistors, and those transistors are made of silicon. And so at the bottom, like when all the layers go through, you connect back to the physical world. And I think that it's like worth, I don't know, considering that they're not really completely separate worlds. This is some artwork that was like etched in as like a couple nanometers wide onto some microchip in the 80s. I think it's cool. Okay, yeah, so I mentioned all of these, I think, like cool properties that a physical material can lend to your artwork, or that a digital material can. And so they've got like affordances of letting you build anything at all. They have limitations that kind of like stop you from, tell you when to stop or give you something to push against. There's shared ideas that are kind of like put by the creator into the material and that you can learn from, and that can express themselves in your own work for better or for worse. And they're also kind of like, it's a language of collaboration, where if you are like, I think that I think of like open source is a community where people oftentimes are, the way that they relate to each other is by sharing a material instead of actually talking person to person, but that connection can still be really meaningful. And so I guess that I think that this is like kind of like looking at the digital world and perceiving it through this idea of texture and of what are the materials that compose something, and what are the properties that are coming from the materials, and what are the properties that are coming from the artist, and like, are those things in harmony, or what's going on there, is a really beautiful thing to do. And I think it's like it's a way to learn from the world. And I think that like, if you're a creator, it's good to listen to what your materials are telling you. And if they are like pushing against a certain idea, or they're pushing you down a certain path, it's good to remember that like, yeah, the material does have a say in what happens a little bit. And if it's not saying what you want it to say, then you can maybe try to use a different material. Maybe another kind of like thing I would want to urge people to do is to expose the materials in your work, and like leave them visible. And so this is like, oftentimes this is seen as like amateur, to, you know, you don't want to like use the default skybox in Unity because people will recognize it. But I think that by exposing what materials went into your work, it allows the viewer to experience it on that extra layer and to have a connection to the process and to you. And so I think it's a good thing to do. Another thing is that I think that the power of a familiar material that people have their own relationships to, like for instance, like Minecraft blocks, if you can work with that material and that texture and express your idea with it, then you gain all of these other experiences that people have and all these other connections people have to the texture of Minecraft. And then maybe your sculpture can be like mentally understood in all these extra ways. And I think that this can be like subversive to work with familiar materials. It can just be like, it can just help people understand what you're doing. And I think that this is something that can be like really fun and exciting about, I don't know, like digital mischief a little bit sometimes. And I guess finally that like materials are constructed, and if you don't like the materials that you have to work with in the world, I think you can rearrange materials and like make new ones, and either like compose new layers of the existing ones, or try to tell an alternate history of how materials could have evolved. And this can just be for yourself, of assembling kind of like a workbench of pieces that you like to use together, but it can also be for other people, and this can help other people like I don't know, like create on the terms that they want to. And so I think that people talk about like making tools, and I think that maybe you should consider like making materials that can be combined. So with a different worldview. So that's my kind of like perspective on what like a digital material is. And I really appreciate the chance to talk to you today. And yeah, I hope that's interesting.
Max, thank you so much. That's wonderful. What a beautiful talk. We have maybe 1 minute for a question, and then we'll wrap it up. And who do you feel like your work is for? Who do you want to reach with your work? And I should just say to everyone that Mac's work is intensely online, and I encourage you all to check out. It's at maxbitker.com. Am I right? You can all see his many projects, which are at your fingertips. But I'm curious who you hope or like to reach with your work.
Yeah, I mean, I when I was growing up, like I had internet access, but I wasn't like I couldn't download or like buy software. Like, and so I spent lots of time like playing Flash games and doing all the things you can do on the internet that are free. And so I kind of that's always like the audience that I have in mind is people who maybe they have free time, they have an internet connection, but like they're stuck somewhere or they're bored or they don't know about something. And I think that like there are so many beautiful things in the world that you won't know about unless somebody gives you a book or you find it. And I think that like just trying to package things that I love into like a website is, to me, like that's who I'm trying to bring things that I think are cool to people who have a browser, I guess, and free
That's
time.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Terrific. Thank you. I'm sure there's going to be more questions for you over in the Discord. And to those of you who are online, if you are not registered with Art and Code, if you go to artandcode.com/homemade, you can register for our conference, and that will give you access to the Discord channel where you can have conversations with our speakers and everyone else in the community who's following along and chatting. With that, we're going to take a break for a couple minutes, and then we will pick it up again at 10:30 with LaJaunet McMillian. See you all soon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Max. Good morning and welcome back, everyone, to our second session of today. This is Art and Code Homemade, and I'm delighted to welcome you to a presentation by Lajeunesse McMillian. This is Lajeunesse' second Art and Code. Lajeunesse presented at the 2016 Art and Code called Weird Reality, which was all about new and independent visions for augmented and virtual realities. Lajeunesse is a new media artist, maker, and creative technologist based in Maryland and New York. Their work integrates performance, virtual reality, and physical computing to create intersectional media systems that support the needs of suppressed communities. Lajeunesse McMillian.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lajeunesse and I'm a new media artist. And yeah, I've been doing this work now for about 7 years, integrating performance with augmented and virtual reality experiences, as well as installation art. And I started this work as part of my time at NYU Tandon's integrated digital media program. After I left the program, I realized that my access to a lot of these technologies was very limited. And it made me question access just in general to all of these different technologies. So yeah, in the past few years, access to motion capture data, 3D character-based models, and software to make animation yourself has skyrocketed from MakeHuman to Mixamo to Carnegie Mellon's motion capture database. The ability to make and finish polished projects has become easier for many. And while these resources are extremely helpful to create a range of projects, they lack tools to create diverse characters and movements unexplored by systems that center assumptions of neutrality. And so I decided to start the Black Movement Library, which started as an online database of Black motion capture data and Black character-based models. But I realized that my approach to creating the space was not necessarily correct, mainly because representation is not enough. I did not want to perpetuate systems of harm on our bodies and on our movements and how we move in the space. So I needed to start to question what it means to be seen in these digital spaces and what it means to be liberated in these spaces as well. And yeah, so we first need to understand how our movements and bodies are already represented in the media and in the tools that we use. And this is just a quote from We Need to Talk About Digital Blackface, and I'll just read it out. I'll just read out actually like from the half to the bottom. Many of our most beloved entertainment genres owe at least part of themselves to the minstrel stage, including vaudeville, film, and cartoons. While often associated with Jim Crow era racism, the tenets of minstrel performance remain alive today in television, movies, music, and its most advanced iteration on the internet. So yeah, so digital blackface is essentially an evolution, an evolved version of blackface that's seen in a lot of different like social media platforms, but also in a lot of different tools that I'll show. But yeah, while I started creating, during like the first few months that I started creating this space in 2018, lawsuits were filed against Fortnite for using dances from mainly Black creators without permission, compensation, or credit. So the Millie Rock became the Swipe It, the Carlton became the Fresh, effectively erasing the origins of these dances. However, currently lawsuits are on pause because the dances are not considered choreography under copyright law. And so yeah, so that's essentially how it's seen in video games. A lot of these dances can be bought on the platform and then applied to characters of various different races. So it just sort of like really has this question of what it means to erase the origins of a dance. Or of like a community of creators. But blackface is also seen in memes and GIFs, like on Twitter, and also in its most recent iteration on TikTok, where a lot of different white creators have stolen different dance phrases from Black creatives on the platform. And while they're getting a lot of different just like promotion and a lot of different opportunities from these stolen dances, a lot of the different Black creators and Black activists on these same platforms are silenced and surveilled at just like really wild rates. So so that's in social media space, but also there are like different tools that don't necessarily show us also. And in this back picture GIF, there's this is a GIF of the dancer that I was working with doing this like hip hop dance like in this database. So this is actually Mixamo, and Mixamo is a free database that you can use. I do recommend that folks who are interested in getting into animation use this tool. However, when you're looking for culturally specific movements in these existing motion capture databases, you may find some, but are often met with dances and movements that don't reflect the search terms. So like in the back there, the character is doing a hip hop dance, but clearly that's not hip hop dancing. So it's like, what's going on? But also in the name of making it easy to use, these tools often omit valuable information from the users, including information about the motion capture actor who provided the movement and important historical and cultural information about the movements performed. And this is another example of a character creation software that I use called FaceGen, which also attaches, which is a plugin for DAZ 3D. And essentially, it's really good for recompiling faces by uploading your pictures to the space. However, you can see on the right here, with all of these different sliders, there are a lot of problems that arise. You can see that at the bottom half here, they've reduced a lot. They've created a lot of different problematic sliders for African, East Asian, South Asian, and European. So basically, like, you know, I have a lot of questions around what software, like where did they get this information from for like, this is what makes you look more quote unquote African or more East Asian or more South Asian or more European? Where are you getting this information from? And also, how can you sort of like take all of this range of data for all of the different ways that somebody can look, a person can look into one slider? But also, interesting enough, you can also see that as the features become darker in skin tone, they also associate that with feminine, quote unquote, feminine and masculine characteristics of the face. So you can sort of see like how these biases are implemented way more clearly than in a lot of different other softwares when it comes to how software developers see the body, see our faces and how we are. And so, yeah, the common thread of these examples is the oversimplification of Black people, our stories, and our lives. And this is really a network of systems that quantify and degrade our humanity in order to capitalize off of our existence and being. And so how do we combat that, the exploitation, the erasure, and the dilution of our culture and of our people? And what do the cultural reparations look like? Black movement does not only represent our individual experiences, but it also represents our collective memory, transcending space, time, and white supremacist social structures. It allows us to connect to each other, our ancestors, our deepest selves, and gives us a space to communicate to our future. Black movement is also a technology holding the stories of our existence across the diaspora. And our stories and bodies are more than data points and avatars. They hold our humanity. And so it's time for digital spaces and all of the physical spaces that we enter to reflect that. So yeah, I just ended up having way more questions than answers. What does it mean to ethically digitize our movement? How can it better serve and celebrate the community? And how can we effectively challenge digital tools and landscapes that don't share these values and gain liberation over our collective future? In Black performance theory, Dr. Nadine George Graves defined diasporic spidering as the multi-directional process by which people of African descent define their lives, the lifelong ontological gathering of information by going out into the world and coming back to the self. She does this by drawing connections to the evolving folklore of Anansi, to how Google and other search engines use web crawlers to find and organize new information for their growing databases. So basically taking this idea of diasporic spidering, the Black Movement Library is a space for activists, performers, and artists to create diverse extended reality projects, a space to research how and why we move, and an archive of our existence. And we seek to grow this community through the use of performances, a various amount of XR experiences, workshops, conversations, and tool making. And so, yeah, so basically, last year, I started with creating a performance series, which started with Nala Duma and Ronaldo Luis, where we used the perception neurons to an Unreal Engine to essentially create these movement portrait landscapes. And I'm going to show you a video of what happened. However, essentially, they both, I did interviews with them both. And through those interviews about their movement journeys, I embedded those into the soundscapes that they performed to. And I did all this work as part of a residency at Barbarian Group. And I'm going to show a movement portrait that came from that. So it first started as a live performance. So there was a live performance with live projections, but I'm just going to show the movement portrait, which is a 2D representation of all of the movements from that performance.
I produce, write, perform music, R&B, hip hop, pop music through an experimental electronic lens. The root of my art is very black, very traditional, black music, black art. My whole family South African. I was the only one born in the United States. They all speak Zulu. That's another thing I want to know before I die. Is to speak Zulu. I think I was 10 years, 9 or 10 years, but my dad was like, you know, speak sports, more active. I did soccer during the summer, but it seemed like made more sense I had done soccer before.
Yeah, and just in the interest of time, I'm just gonna go back to the presentation. But yeah, they're both 10-minute long pieces for both Nala and Ronaldo. And essentially you're just learning about their movement journeys, and you're learning about their movement journeys both through their own words, but also through their movements as well. And yeah, so they're seen as both a live performance and a docuseries. And basically over 4 months, I was just learning about their movement journeys and practices. And this translation, I do want to go over this. Like, this translation into a portrait allows the movement to be re-represented as an abstract digital memory of the performance day. And over the course of the year, I sat with the data, relearning both Nala and Ronaldo through their movement and interviews, reconstructing and diving into the visual process as its own ritual. How do we translate digital representations of the self and others? And that brings me into the workshop series that I've been developing for the past 2 years now, called Understanding, Transforming, and Preserving Movement in Digital Spaces, which is a workshop to learn about extended reality tools in relationship to race, gender, and culture. And it's been a traveling workshop, and I've hosted it at IBEAM, Afrotectopia, Pioneer Works, Barbarian Group, Barnard College, City College, and PBS POV. And now it has an online version where I'm helping folks find all of these different softwares online. Because we can't use any different motion capture software tools, we're actually using Deep Motion, which is a AI powered, I'm gonna move this, I don't know if y'all can see this, but it's an online based motion capture, AI powered motion capture database where you can upload videos of yourself, as long as it's a full body video capture of you. It can recompile, it can use algorithms to recompile your movements into 3D animations. And yeah, and that brings me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which was Antidote. And this was a project in collaboration with Marguerite Hemmings. And we essentially created new portals of care using Zoom, but also motion capture and Unreal Engine. And we were also able to collaborate with Reina Anakwe, Saloma Isega, and Amber Starks. And we got a beautiful, different like soundscape and a really beautiful digital land acknowledgement from there. And I'll just read this last part, and then I'll show you a clip of that. So yeah, Antidote is an offering and a prayer. It's an interruption, hacking, a portal, a medicine, a ritual response, and physical undoing of the lie that we are not our own and that we are not free. And oops, I just wanted to show a portion of this. And this is Salome Asega's part of the digital.
Antidote is online and away from keyboard. A place that cultivates networks of care to conceal and protect each other from that tries to eat us, devour us, make us consumable bits of information to trade. A place where ones and zeros make a loose bedrock, and what really holds the foundation for our gathering in this virtual place is our innate illegible technologies. Here, technology is not just an extension of the body, but also an assemblage of tools that have been passed down and inherited for us to mesh and knit our survival, pleasure, and growth. Antidote is where we champion our Black collectivity and unbox the black box. It is a place for healing. The internet is full of sharp edges. There are plenty of places to get cut and nicked. Look at your scrolling fingertips. Do you see notches? I have cuts from seeing black gloss go viral on platforms that thrive on the spectacle of us. Antidote is cultivating a new place for Black creativity, how we move, how we be, our cool, that thing, our history, our future, the story of us. Our resilience has always been our way forward and our way back. Antidote calls for abolition. We are in a nook of the virtual that springs from a knowing that we can no longer be an afterthought or special consideration to an existing information infrastructure that didn't consider us from the outset, or pretends not to see us but collects us as dark data. Antidote is tired of digital inclusion as amendment. The problems of technology cannot be solved with more technology. Antidote is restorative. Before Silicon Valley's advance to invent our future for us, before the 18th century Spanish missions in the region, the Ohlone were stewards of an abundant Northern California rich in animal and plant life. 500 years after the Ohlone were alpha caretakers, big tech occupies the land and prioritizes profit to the point of overturning a site from resource-rich to resource-intensive. And like a germ, the depletion spreads because we've built global dependence on this US construction. Finding our way back to abundance is urgent. Repatriation and the redistribution of money and resources are urgent. Decolonization is not a metaphor, but the antidote. Antidote is consentful. There are no terms and conditions here because service is not monopolized, but upon each of us. Power and responsibility are distributed. Remember, we have the tools in us to architect better ways to hold each other.
Yeah, and I'll stop there for that one. And yeah, I guess the last thing that I just want to say is that this library is a movement that celebrates our history, our culture, and that serves our community to learn and grow as society evolves. And it holds us accountable in the ways we deal with Black people, our movements, our bodies, and our lives. And I'll stop the share now because I wanted to also show basically just like how I've been like making animations. Basically I'm wearing the perception neuron suit here, and this background space is where I've been animating myself, doing all of these movements. And I was just going to share my screen to like access neuron. Essentially, like my body's all like really bad right now, but essentially like I would go through like a calibration series, and yeah, I've been doing mocap like using the perception neuron suit in my living room. So yeah, I think like that's like where I wanted to like end things. Like, thank you all like so much for uh like listening to and like sharing the space with me. If there are any questions, I guess like we can do that now.
Hi, Lajane. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. It's a great talk. I have a question, which is an aspect of what homemade is now. The digital homemade or the neo homemade is, making things for oneself, one's friends, family, and community. And your Black Movement Library is clearly, coming from your community and back to its community. Maybe you, like I saw that sort of Christmas time or New Year's video from Boston Dynamics, the robot folks who had made these dancing robots that were clearly appropriating traditional Black dance movements from the 20th century, and we see Black dance, Black movement continually reappropriated, often without credit. Now, in robots even. And these are likely robots, I think, in a particularly ghoulish way, which are almost like proto-cops that are going to be suppressing Black lives. I guess my question for you is, in making a Black movement library, presumably, from a community and for a community, you're distilling movements and also making them repurposable in a way. And there's a risk that in making them repurposable, it's going to come out of your control, and which is good and bad, right? I mean, you want people to use it in ways you couldn't have planned, but you also want to see it used in ways that are ethical and responsible to the material. How do you make sure that you don't have dancing cop robots who are using your library?
Yeah, I guess, and I guess that's also like why I changed my approach to the library space. Like, I think like in the beginning, I was very much just interested in having, just like a data set and database of this stuff. But I realized that like really early on that I didn't want to be someone who was like perpetuating that space. Like, we have a long history of exploitation of like Black people. Like, that's literally like, hashtag slavery. Like, that is like the basis of America. And so all that I can do is make sure that I am, contributing to stewarding and working in spaces that are trying to or working towards abolition, like and what it means to abolish those ways of thinking about how we treat people, our bodies, and like what our bodies can be and what our bodies can produce. Creating and not even creating, but yes, like working to uncover and to rediscover and reestablish like our connections to our own humanity. Like, what does that look like? We're living in a lot of different systems right now: white supremacy, patriarchy, imperialism, all of the isms, right? And all of those isms really contribute to all of us, dehumanizing ourselves in order to fit into capitalism, to like fit into a systems that like commodify our bodies in ways that make it hard for us to humanize ourselves and to humanize each other. So what does it mean to create spaces and to reestablish those spaces, steward those spaces where that's not the case, So that's really what I'm interested in, like I think that like that shift from like database and seeing ourselves as just data and seeing ourselves as human, as people who hold like so much information, and trying to like, and I guess like the expansion from database to library allows space for us to be in many ways in that space. It allows us to like really care for ourselves and care for each other in that space, and to really see ourselves and to see each other in that space too. So I'm really interested in, and I guess like that's like, the basis of the research that I've been like, I guess like developing and working with in the latest iteration of understanding, transforming, and preserving movement in digital spaces. We did a lot of like movement work. So we did a lot of like witnessing activities where we were mirroring each other over Zoom. And then we were placed with, and then basically we were given, I gave everyone prompts to define their movement, to define each other's movement, and to really think about, how those movements make you feel. Last thing with this, I've been really thinking about what it means to transition from motion capture to motion witnessing. I feel like the term capture is so, it has just like really problematic, just like a really problematic, etymology, this idea of capturing something, of owning something, like what does it mean to really transform that into something new and different. And so, so basically the space, the library space, I don't own it. I'm a steward of the space. I'm a caretaker of the space. And I am trying to cultivate and help other folks come into the space. And through that, we're all having to do this work of decolonizing and decommodifying our bodies.
Thank you. This notion of motion witnessing and of the decommodification of movement data is really, I think, at this new essence of the neo homemade. With that, I have to close this. Thank you so much, Lajane. In about 4 minutes, we'll pick it up with Hannah Perner-Wilson. And so everyone stay tuned. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
morning, everyone, and welcome back for our third presentation of Friday morning of Art and Code Homemade. It's our terrific pleasure to introduce Hannah Perner-Wilson, who develops new types of artifacts that emphasize materiality and process, and which allow us to glimpse another world of electronic diversity. Perner-Wilson is professor of digital games and objects at the Ernst Busch Academy of Dramatic Arts in Berlin. Hannah Perner-Wilson.
Thank you, Golan. Yeah, hello, everyone who I can't see. I'm actually calling from a small town in the Austrian Alps, and my internet connection is not that great, so I'm hoping that it's going to stay stable for the call. While preparing my presentation, I had a chance to talk with Golan, and he said that Art and Code isn't really a venue for kind of portfolio presentations of projects. Much rather, it's an opportunity to reflect on one's work from a different angle, possibly a more personal one. And so I thought, if I may, spend the next 20 minutes talking to you a bit about my relationship issues, or rather a bit of a crisis that happened about 5 years ago. Yeah, I've been in a relationship for about 15 years now. And in the beginning, I mean, it was great. We had a lot of fun and yeah, endless opportunities. And it was almost kind of a love at first sight. But then 5 years ago, things started to get difficult. But maybe before I get into the bad stuff, I'll tell you a little bit more about what it was like in the beginning when things were nice and we were having fun. So this is a collection of some of my memorabilia from 15 years of practice in electronic textiles. What I also didn't mention is that I'm actually back home in Austria at the moment, in my childhood home, which is a place that whenever I come here, I bring old projects and bits and pieces and things that I don't have space to store in Berlin. And so over the years, this room that I'm in right now is actually just full of stuff. This is just a small collection. And yeah, these are from the kind of my early years working with electronic textiles. It's been a very long lasting work relationship, as I said. This is a tilt sensor made by sewing a metal bead on some conductive thread, and it can make contact with these different patches of conductive fabric. So you could read out what angle it's tilted at. This is actually a woven speaker. I mean, it's pretty cool. You can weave conductive thread in a spiral like this on a circular loom, and you not only create the electromagnetic that you need to vibrate your speaker membrane, but you can actually use this as the membrane itself. So this is a working woven speaker. This here is actually a tool handle I made. It's one of the first prototypes of an ohm hook tool handle that I made for my crochet hook that allows me to measure the resistance of conductive yarns as I'm actually working the material. Yeah, I think what really attracted me to e-textiles was its materiality. In the background, you can see a bunch of documentation of kind of my master's thesis work that I did with Leah Beakley in the high-low tech group. And I explored different kinds of craft techniques and electronics. And Leah actually at the time gave a talk on falling in love with technology. And a lot of the work we did in the group at that time was trying to create opportunities for other people like us to fall in love with kind of technology that was more soft and crafty. And I think that's also what got me, this craftiness, that I could use my hands. And for example, crochet is so lovely because you just need this hook and some yarn, and you can go anywhere and make sensors, build strange interfaces into digital worlds. And if you actually would bear with me a moment, I could take you to a place where I could show you what I really find most sexy about electronic textiles. So if you would close your eyes for just a moment. While I take us, and imagine that you're shrinking, you're becoming really tiny and small. So small that you could maybe go inside of the fibers of the sweater that you're wearing. Or, for example, the piece of crochet that I was just working on. Here you can see some of those fibers. The white is polyester, but the dark strands are stainless steel. And the copper here is a copper thread. You can see how the copper's been flattened and wrapped around the fibers and then spun together to make them strong. So I think what I can't get over is that e-textiles allows me to really use my body, my eyes, and my skin, and my hands, and my smell to work with these materials. It's happening on a level that I can interact with fully. And now if you close your eyes again, and so then that was maybe the end of the, you have to bear with me a moment while I figure out my Zoom interface. So yeah, the early years with e-textiles were amazing, and it was great. Then I'd say about 5 years ago, I think it was in 2015 when Google actually released a video about its project Jakar, and it's a great video because it did a really great job of explaining in beautiful imagery what electronic textiles are, how they're made, what you could do with them. And they collaborated with a lot of designers, or not sure how many, but they collaborated with designers and companies because they then were looking to try to prototype and implement e-textiles into things that could become a next line of products in the market. And seeing this video, and it shouldn't have been a surprise to me or to other people, I think, who had been working in e-textiles from this more crafty end, but somehow it was this kind of shock that this kind of fantastical world of technology that we had been imagining, all kinds of fun interactions and projects with, was all of a sudden so close to the market. And this idea of the things that we were doing were no longer separable from what was going on in a realm of technology that we weren't necessarily so happy about. I think we were also really surprised to see that in an age where we knew about issues of e-waste and kind of fast fashion and kind of textile industry pollution, that the product ideas that were coming out of, and it wasn't just Google, there were lots of companies at the time bringing out ideas. But there was very little thoughtfulness about what's going to happen with these projects and the products in the kind of greater life cycle of their contribution. So yeah, that's really kind of, that was a moment in time where things went a bit downhill, and they've not really recovered from since then. A lot of the work that I showed from the early years wasn't just done by me alone. I collaborate almost as long as, since I met eTextiles, I've been collaborating with Mika Satomi under the collective Kobakant. And we both had this kind of experience. And I remember we then went to a cafe one day to talk about like what kinds of things do we want to work on now that this kind of in love period was kind of coming to an end. And it didn't take us long to come up with this idea that we wanted to do something that would allow us to discuss these issues with other people. And we had this idea to open an eTextile tailor shop as a place opposed to this idea of mass producing eTextile products, to custom making eTextiles for individual people. And in order to find out what would people want if a place like this existed, we thought we just need to open it up. We called it Koba, and I don't have any pictures of it. So I kind of set up a bit of a reenactment of it. And so this is Koba. Let's see. We got funding and we saved up our money so that we could rent a space. And this was a shopfront space in Berlin, in Kreuzberg. And it was quite a big space. You would kind of enter in, and the first room was kind of the showroom. I'm trying to get the angle good. It was a kind of showroom where there were examples of what you could do with eTextiles, so that people who came in could get a bit of an idea. And in the back, we had a kind of a couch area where we would sit and talk and eat lunch. We had a kitchen in the back where we cooked lunch every day. And then the main part of the tailor shop was the actual workshop where the tailoring happened. And so on a kind of regular day in the tailor shop, we find a good angle. This would be, this is Hannah, this is Mika. I might have been sitting at the computer doing some custom PCB layouting or the taxes, and Mika, we had this beautiful big work table where we did everything from pattern making to kind of circuit layout, and then also constructing things. So we would be working on a project, and not that it happened so often, but every once in a while, somebody would actually walk into the tailor shop, and they would come in with an idea of something that they wanted. And this was Boris. He's actually a humanities professor, but he also plays in a street music band. And he wanted to have a light up jacket for his band. He plays the trombone, and he wanted it to light up as he was playing his instrument. And so he came in, and whenever a new customer came in, we would spend some time talking about the idea and how we could possibly implement it. And we would draw sketches, and we would then work on making up a toile, like a prototype of the garment, to figure out the fit. And we would also prototype the circuit separately and make tests for the sensing and the actuating. And then Boris would have gone away, and normally it would take us 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes even longer for the two of us, and sometimes we would even get outside help and a lot of late nights to then finish the orders for the customers. And so then Boris would have come back and received his, we called it the breathing The trombone breathing vest was the commission that he received. And I don't have any pictures here, but if you go online to the Koba Tailor Shop website, if you go to the trombone breathing vest commission, you can see pictures of the vest and watch a video of him playing his trombone with it lighting up. And so Koba was basically kind of like a fairy tale. And to keep with the relationship analogy, maybe it was something like a romantic holiday, for 1 year we made believe that we were e-textile tailors and that this was a life that we could live. But it wasn't financially sustainable, and it was never intended to be. And Koba, we closed the shop 2 years ago now. And since then, kind of been recovering a bit financially and maybe also mentally. And I think some of the best advice I got in those since then has actually come from Daniela Rosner, who's speaking tomorrow, I think. And yeah, it's kind of along the lines of this. It's not about breaking up and running away from technology or e-textiles just because I'm upset with some of the things that I see, but rather if I want to be happy in the long run, it's about cultivating a kind of, or caring about something. So caring about e-textiles. And if I care about it enough, I could use that to bring up the energy to look to see where it's broken and to work towards fixing it. So I think I'm at the point now where I'm no longer thinking of breaking up and running away from e-textiles, but I'm definitely also still working through the issues that I see with this field. And yeah, so last year I departed on a new e-textile adventure. As Golan mentioned, I'm now a professor at the Performing Arts University in Berlin. And our master's program is called Spiel und Objekt, game and, or play and object. And I think I'm kind of taking e-textiles with me into this new position because I'm thinking I have a chance to enjoy working with it, as I see e-textiles as a kind of a prop for storytelling and for trying out other ways of being in the world. And yeah, and it's also kind of a bit coming full circle. I'm like back in an educational setting again, which for me is a place of exploration but also research, and not to be doing that alone. So I think what I told you, that what seduced me about e-textiles was the kind of craftiness, and that I could use my hands, and that the materials are so, yeah, and to me, they're beautiful and aesthetically really interesting. But I think that was a bit of a trick that was kind of the shiny, sexy surface. But I think what really sustained my practice over the last years was that I was also part of a community of people practicing in this field. And so I see being part of this educational program as also an opportunity for more community building and exploring technology together. I still have some time left, and I don't know, I recently was reading a kind of an advice book on how to choose a partner. So maybe I can read a passage from there. This is something I was reading when I was not quite sure I was going to stay working in e-textiles. When you make a choice, you change the future. Choosing a romantic partner is one of contemporary life's biggest adventures. Embark on a quest and we may meet fascinating people as well as some who make us crazy. We may rise to emotional heights as well as sinking into fury, fear, and depression. We may lose direction completely before at last we find our way to love. The real challenge is that we grow. Partner choice is a self-development journey, driving us to learn more about ourselves, about other people, about life and the way we want to live it. Take all that on board and we start to realize just how big an adventure choosing a partner is. So yeah, thank you for indulging me on my relationship issues. I guess there's time for questions now, but also I would really love if you have, I don't know if it's advice or just also if you could share from your own experiences with your work relationship, how you manage to sustain it through difficult times and keep yourself excited about what you do. Thank you.
Hannah, thank you so much for this incredible view into your practice and your passion. It's really easy to understand how 15 years of relationship with a technologized creative medium could really evolve a lot, you know, since 2005, let's say, where you have the maker movement and this kind of bright, shiny kind of thing that was, and this sort of the ride that we've been on as we've kind of come out of that is really interesting. And it's super interesting for us to hear about your relationship to this, especially as things that start small and kind of punk become kind of adopted by Google and, you know, take certain things maybe away from us, or think we might. It's really interesting to see your view. There's a question from the Discord, which is, do you see yourself primarily as a storyteller with these materials as your media? And is that your true love now, perhaps?
Wow, that's, I think, yeah, exactly what I've been trying to remind myself, that that's why I took on this professorship job in this performing arts university, because I wanted to give myself a push in the storytelling direction. So I don't know if I see myself as it yet, but yeah, that's what I'd like to go.
You're in a program in Berlin. It's one of the few programs in the world that has a program in digital puppetry as well, which is a super interesting sort of parallel connection as well. It seems, I mean, you're fantastically creative. You know, I spent an afternoon going through your Flickr site looking for images and was just overwhelmed with sort of the efflorescence of your creativity. You must hold a lot of projects in your heart, though. I mean, things that you've made that are special to you or that you felt good about because they touched someone. Do you have another story to tell about a project you made, maybe at the tailor shop, or a thing you made that you know was never intended to be mass produced, but just a thing that you feel close to that you can leave us with?
Yeah, I'm like,
or a story,
I'm scouring the room now to find something that
or an experience of a gift perhaps that you received or gave or some story.
Yeah, well, that's kind of easy because I have here, right, 2 Christmases ago, I decided to write a story for my parents, because for a while I've been sick of Christmas gifts, and I thought I wanted my parents to dress up and be silly with me. So I wrote them this story, and then I made little masks, or not little masks, I made masks for the characters in the story. And then I made them put on these masks, and then we went over to the neighbors and scared them a bit. But this is, in the story, it was kind of set in the future, and the beings in the future, there were different kinds of beings had evolved, but one of these beings was Homo lumens, and it had managed to kind of form some kind of synergy with, there's moss here and some pine cones, in order to survive in an atmosphere on Earth where the sun had disappeared. And in order to form this synergy, which allowed the humans to draw oxygen from the environment, but every time they would breathe in, it required so much energy that they couldn't think. So their lives were their thinking was very well organized, but kind of compartmentalized. And so this mask actually connected to kind of a breathing sensor. And every time you breathed in, it would kind of light up. This crochet part here would glow because it was requiring so much energy to breathe. And I had this image in my head of us all sitting around in the living room in the dark, and only the breathing of our masks would be illuminating the space.
Hannah, there's so much permission that you've given us as a gift in this presentation today. I mentioned yesterday to Irene, the permission to be a hybrid, but you've given us so many other kinds of permission in this presentation. I just want to say thank you so much. I don't want to even put names to them all. There's a lot to think about, some of which is verbal and some of which is not. It's great to get this view onto your creative practice.
Thank you so much, Golan, for the opportunity to present.
It's great. So that concludes our morning session. We will rejoin everyone. We'll gather again today at 1:30 in the afternoon Eastern Time with Ari Malenciano for our afternoon session. And I'll see you all there. Thanks, everyone, and have a good lunch.
Bye-bye.
Bye.